Never Finished. Unshackle Your Mind and Win the War Within was written by David Goggins, who is a retired United States Navy SEAL, ultramarathon runner, ultra-distance cyclist, public speaker, author, and the list goes on. Throughout my time with Never Finished, I felt extremely motivated and driven to work harder, to be disciplined, to be grateful, to push myself in every aspect of my life, and above all, to run. Like, run my first ever marathon type of inspiration. I'll be walking you guys through a summary of this book, some of my favorite moments and key takeaways, and what you can expect if you decide to pick it up for yourself. All that I ask is that if you're a fan of David Goggins, that you hit that like button for me right now, and I promise that this video will not disappoint you. Introduction. Goggins starts the book by telling us about a famous but cruel experiment conducted by Johns Hopkins professor Kurt Richter, who placed rats into buckets of water to see how long they would survive before drowning. 34 wild rats are placed into buckets of water, and all 34 die in a matter of minutes. This surprised the professor since wild rats are supposed to be great swimmers, and he hypothesizes that the reason that the rats died wasn't because of their lack of ability, but instead that they lacked hope that they would survive since they were trapped in the bucket. So, to test his hypothesis, he gets some more wild rats and repeats the experiment, but this time he takes the rats out of the water just as they are on the brink of drowning. This is again after only a few minutes, and he saves them. Then he helps them recover and get back into the water, and then this time they're able to swim for 60 hours straight, and some of them even 80 hours without stopping or eating. Goggins says that he thinks it isn't just hope that got the rats to swim longer, but instead the belief that they could keep swimming until they would be saved. The same way that these rats are able to swim longer when they believe someone will come and save them is the same way that many of us act in our lives. Goggins doubles down here to tell us that there is a distinct difference between belief and hope. The definition of hope is a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. While hope relies on us putting our trust in external factors and praying that they fall in our favor, belief, and more specifically self-belief, is a whole other beast that many people haven't fully unlocked. The definition of belief is trust, faith, or confidence in someone or something. That someone or something doesn't have to be so ambiguous. If you have self-belief, then you can be rest assured that it's you. You are the someone or something that will get you out of that impossible situation. The one that sees no light at the end of the tunnel, only darkness, and continues going through it because whether you know it or not, your eyes over time will adjust to that darkness, and that darkness will turn to light. You just needed time to get used to it, seeing what you couldn't see before. Many of us will not push forward in a hopeless situation, or more specifically, situations where there is no clear end in sight. The hopeless situations are where it is crucial that your self-belief kicks in. This applies to the challenging things in life, when things are not only hard, but they're getting brutal. Goggins challenges us to think, if that were me, swimming all alone in my current situation with no path to the finish line, how long would I be able to go before I drowned under the pressure or gave into exhaustion? While Richter surmised that the rats survived longer because they had the hope of being saved, Goggins' theory is that their greatest strength was belief in themselves, and he reveals how incredibly powerful it is when you can utilize it in each and every endeavor of your life. Goggins emphasizes that this
ain't no self-help book. This is a what the are you doing with your life book.
Chapter 1. Maximizing Minimal Potential. As Goggins was about to receive the VFW Americanism Award, he begins to think of all the reasons why he shouldn't be where he is right now. All of the terrible conditions that he went through growing up, from him and his mother being physically and mentally abused by his father, to being severely overweight at 300 pounds, to not having any discipline, and so on. He compares his former self to a cockroach, only coming out from the shadows of the comfort zone that he placed himself in for the bare necessities, like going to work or eating. He thinks about how differently his life could have went if he never really tapped into his true potential. Goggins said that growing up, he always had two voices in his head. One was a nurturing voice that told him 24/7 that his life circumstances were not his fault and made him feel good about being mediocre in life. His second voice, however, had a brutal and ice-cold tone. This voice did agree that his life circumstances were not his fault, but told him to take responsibility for what was ahead of him and to take his life into his own hands from this point forward. Goggins, having been a certified EMT for 20 years, compares his own personal trauma, which distracted him from taking charge of his life and accepting responsibility, to the horrifying injuries of patients that distract EMTs from checking vitals when they arrive at the scene. Goggins says tragedies such as breakups, a family member's death, being broke, getting fired, etc. require us to collect ourselves and move on. He emphasizes that he is not dismissing the problem, and he is not saying that it does not hurt or that the pain isn't real, but he is saying that you must continue on in life because there is nothing you can do about that situation other than to bounce back and become stronger. He says if you cannot move on and be that stronger person that you need, then you must invent in your mind that person and become that new person to conquer your reality. While Goggins eventually did begin to listen to that second, colder voice in his head, it took him a lot of absolutely grueling training and mental growth to get there. Goggins says that our society has been conditioned to believe that we deserve awards and praise just for existing, and that when he receives an award like the Americanism Award, after all the blood, sweat, and tears that went into earning something like this, it gives a whole new level of appreciation and sense of accomplishment to the things that he has done in his life. After Goggins receives this award, he reflects on what he has done during his service and comes to terms with facing the unknown next chapter of his life all alone. Chapter 2. Marry,
Christmas. While many people celebrate Christmas and take this day as a time to relax, eat chocolate chip cookies, and spend time with family, to David Goggins, this was just another day on the calendar. This is mainly because of his upbringing that involved Christmas not being celebrated, and instead him being forced to do chores and work for the skating rink for his father. In this chapter, we learned about Can't Hurt Me, Goggins' first book, and how it was turned down by many industry experts when he was looking for an editor and a publisher. Many publishers refused to work with David because they believed that his story, while inspiring, did not have wide enough appeal to sell to a large audience. At one point down the line, he was offered $300,000 for a book deal that would have taken most of his profits and right to a story, but he turned it down, stating he did not want to have someone else have the final edits on his story, since he was the only one who knew all the pain and suffering that he went through to get there. Instead, Goggins decided to self-publish his book and spent nearly all of his life savings and spent countless nights working in order to make his book a reality. Goggins viewed his roadblocks of getting his book published as just another part of his story and another obstacle that he would have to face and eventually overcome. His book Can't Hurt Me, as many of you may know, ended up becoming a New York Times bestseller, selling over 2.5 million copies. While many people who read Can't Hurt Me before he released it claimed that since his story was not easily relatable or digestible to the mass audiences, it would not sell well, Goggins said that this was actually his greatest asset and played the strongest role in the success of his first book because it was unique, refreshing, and a real underdog story. As Goggins celebrates the success of Can't Hurt Me while at an airport with his family, he ends up going into AFib and taken to the ER. He ends up getting an electrical shock to his heart to help stabilize him back to normal. Just as things are starting to look up for Goggins, he gets blindsided by the truck of life. He says that life is the ultimate competitor and that it takes no days off. To me, this is the reason why Goggins doesn't like taking any days off, because life goes on regardless of any success or failure that you have achieved, and it goes to show that even on Christmas, something can go terribly wrong. Chapter 3, The Mental Lab. He felt an internal struggle arise in him every day he woke up because he felt like he deserved everything that he had gotten through his book, but he couldn't help but feel like he was becoming less David Goggins and more accomplished book writer. In his own words, he said he became a part-time savage and was no longer the full-time savage that had gotten him to his current position. Later, he gets invited to compete in the Leadville Trail, a 100-mile race, a famous ultramarathon which is held annually on rugged trails and dirt roads near Leadville, Colorado, through the heart of the Rocky Mountains and elevations of over 10,000 feet. This invitation ends up tearing Goggins apart. On the one hand, he knows that he has every reason to turn down this invitation because of his recent hospitalization due to his heart issues, but on the other hand, he knows that the real savage that he used to be would have done this race with less preparation, more injuries, and less notice. After going back and forth with himself, he manages to join the race a few days late and still manages to get some training in before the race begins. On one particularly blazing hot day leading up to his race, he decides to schedule his most grueling training routine, or it would have been the hardest for him to complete it. During this run, a fan comes up to him and asks him what he's doing outside on a blazing hot day like this and asks him why he's out here.
Today I was running, and this guy passes me in the car. And it's about 100 degrees out here, 70% humidity. And the guy comes back around, looks at me. He pulls his car by me and says, "Why the fuck are you out here?" I said, "Because you're not." Sometimes your motivation needs to be because no one else wants to fucking do it. We need doctors. We need fucking lawyers. We need dentists. We need teachers. We also need fucking savages. This message I do is not for fucking everybody. So I don't want to see that soft bullshit about, do you have sunscreen on? This message is dangerous. It's too hot. I'm not asking you to fucking be like me. Do you? Stay hard.
Goggins tells us that the real reason he did this was because at this point, he was sick of not being the beast that he once was, and that planning your hardest training days in the harshest conditions is something that nobody would even consider doing. The training, and ultimately this race, would be what he needed to move himself closer to his goal of being uncommon amongst the uncommon. This challenge was new for Goggins because his back wasn't against the wall. He wasn't faced with humiliation or forced to be a savage, but instead, this was voluntary pain because he did not want to let himself down or rest on his laurels. To Goggins, it doesn't matter if you just graduated Harvard or finished Ultraman. He says respect is earned daily. He says we should wake up every day hungry like we haven't accomplished anything in our lives. If you're a fan of Goggins, you know when things are getting tough, he'll start to yell,
18. On me, son. Get it. 19. On me, son. Yeah. 20. You got some more in you. 21. Yeah. Get it again. Come on. We want to see it. Good, 22.
Who's gonna carry the boats and the logs?
That's you, buddy. Come on, 23. Come on, 24. One more, David. Who's one more?
Gonna carry the boats.
You're gonna do it. You're gonna do it. You're gonna do it. You did it. Yeah.
Goggins says that if you're the one asking that question, it might as well be you. Chapter 4, A Savage Reborn. As the Leadville 100-mile race gets closer, Goggins' pace was slowing down each time he went on a run for his training. Despite this, Goggins had his mind set that he not only wanted to finish the race, but to do it in under 24 hours. For those of you that are curious, that's about 14 minutes and 24 seconds per mile to run it in exactly 24 hours. This pace is slightly faster than walking speed, but keep in mind that pace is for a non-stop continuous run, meaning no sleeping, no stopping to use the bathroom, no stopping to tend to your cramps, or any of that. The recommended pace for 100 miles in under 24 hours is about a 12-minute mile to allow yourself for small breaks for the bathroom, rehydration, or cramps. Race day is here and Goggins goes flying as the starting gun goes off. Throughout the race, Goggins talks about how grueling and intense the race was on his body. Near the end of the race, Goggins tells us he ran backwards to give his friend a Pop-Tart who was in a lot of pain, and while he was delivering the Pop-Tart to his friend, a runner passed by him and said, "My son told me you'd be in this race and to catch you. Guess I did." While this remark did bother Goggins, he was more concerned about helping his friend who needed him. His friend got furious after hearing the runner say that to David and told David to go catch him because the only reason he got caught was because he came back to give him the Pop-Tart. David gave his friend one last evil smile and went running after him. He eventually did pass him up and brushed right off his shoulder when he did it, so he knew it was Goggins passing him up. Goggins ends up finishing the race in under 23 hours, and out of the 824 runners that started the race, less than half of them finished. Goggins ends up finishing in 35th place, beating his original goal by over an hour with an average mile time of about 13 minutes and 45 seconds per mile for the Leadville 100. Chapter 5, Disciple of Discipline. Goggins reflects on his upbringing where he was instilled with discipline through the various tasks assigned to him by his grandfather, Sergeant Jack, who had served in the military for over 30 years. While he was diligently engaged in cleaning and performing yard work, his peers had minimal responsibilities. However, he credits Sergeant Jack with the person he is today and says the discipline that was ingrained in him through completing these daily chores helped him achieve his goals later in life, like losing over 100 pounds to become a SEAL. He also says that through doing these everyday chores, he realized that most people don't see the lesson or opportunities that present themselves in low-wage jobs or thankless tasks. Attitude and action determine the future, and while he doesn't tell us to be content with working for a low wage, he does say that many times we must learn to do the mundane, boring work before we can rise up the ranks in the world. He says there's no grit at the top and we must learn train humility, which involves being at a higher place in some aspect and bringing ourselves back down to do the dirty work to continue to grow and stay hungry. People walk by responsibility every day because they think it's beneath them. He says as you climb up in life, whether it's in ranking, social status, money, or anything, people will typically stop doing the things that helped them get there in the first place and refuse to do the dirty work. But Goggins says, nobody cares what you did yesterday. What did you do today? Chapter 6, The Art of Getting Hit in the Mouth. In this chapter, Goggins is getting ready to run the Moab 240, which is an annual 240 miles endurance running competition in Utah. This race involves traveling through desert, canyons, slick rock, and 2 mountain ranges, all while surrounded by canyonlands and Arches National Park. It's 2019 and Goggins is preparing to run this race only 6 weeks after he completed Leadville. He says that the Leadville 100-mile race was actually just training for Moab 240, which is crazy to think about, and that this race would be what he really needed to test his mental limits. Race day is here, and as the starting gun goes off, Goggins starts his journey. 24 hours into the race, he's ran over 100 miles, and at this point, Goggins is getting mentally fatigued, so he decides to focus all of his mental energy on running and his form, and let his pacer navigate for him. Pacers, if you didn't know, are basically experienced runners that run at a set speed in a race, and can help you navigate through ultra-distance marathons like the Moab 240. Goggins stops using his own GPS to navigate, but later they realize that they are off course and that they've been running in the wrong direction for many miles. In a split-second decision, Goggins decides to quickly turn around and begin running back the way that they came, and says that getting mad at the pacer wouldn't have done anything except waste valuable mental energy. Goggins takes full accountability for this mistake and admit he's had issues before similar to this of him not being diligent and it backfiring on him. To me, this is absolutely incredible, as not only did Goggins control his temper, but he also acknowledged that even though he gave someone else the responsibility of navigating, that ultimately it was his race to run and that he was in full control of his circumstances. This is a full 180 from the former David Goggins that was drinking chocolate milkshakes spraying roaches for Ecolab. As Goggins reaches his 200th mile, he continues to push past his lung issues that have been bothering him for almost the entirety of the race, and decides to address the people who call him a masochist or those that say he's looking to impress other people. He says that he does what he does because he just wants to see what the mind and body are capable of doing when they are pushed to their limits over and over again. At 215 miles into the race, Goggins reaches a point where his lungs are so uncomfortable and he's in so much pain that he cannot continue continue any longer and must disqualify himself from the race to go to the hospital. He ends up receiving medical treatment and they confirm his lungs are filled with fluid, and he ends up being discharged next morning with an inhaler. Goggins recovers over the next day, and in the middle of the night around 3 a.m. he hears that cold voice telling him, "You're not done yet." He wakes his girlfriend up and asks if there's still time left to finish the race. He ends up returning to run, but this pain he felt when he returned was a different type of pain because his body had already begun the recovery process, so his muscles were incredibly stiff and sore. He finished the race at a telephone pole near the finish line since he did not want to cross the official finish line since he was disqualified. He ended up running a total of 255 miles, 240 from the race, and the 15 miles that he ran off course. And funny enough, all that was on Goggins' mind at this point when he was recovering from that race was what he would do differently when he returned next year for Moab 240 2020. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. In this chapter, Goggins is told by his doctor that his knee is completely messed up after doing all of these races and training over the years. He ends up getting his knee drained and does physical therapy along with a ton of other methods to help his knee recover because now Goggins has his mind set on firefighting. Goggins enrolls in training, and on the first day he ends up injuring his knee and has to get his patella reset. And what's worse is that the doctor tells him he has the knees of a 90-year-old man. Injury after injury begins to plague Goggins, which leads to his doctor telling him that knee replacement surgery is in his future. Regardless, he continues to push forward and rest his knee and do training and stretches to recover until Moab 2020 race day is here. This time, Goggins not only completes the race, but he ends up finishing in second place behind only Michele Graglia, a fellow ultramarathon runner. In typical David Goggins fashion, he even does 25 push-ups after he finishes the marathon to really let the moment sink in. The Moab 240 is held in October, so about a month later, right after Thanksgiving, Goggins hears about a run called Across Florida 200 that he also decides to join semi-randomly after hearing about it. This is exactly what it sounds like, a 200-mile race across the state of Florida through 100 miles of the Florida Trail, 20 miles of state park trails, 45 miles of dirt roads, 15 miles of rails to trails, and only 20 miles of road. And he ends up finishing in first place, clocking in at 70 hours and 21 minutes. Goggins said that since he had already completed Moab 240, that running only 200 miles didn't seem so daunting now, which is mind-blowing that his perspective changed that much. The lesson here is, the more we push ourselves, the more we see what we are capable of, and it goes to show that what seems challenging to us today can become very achievable for us tomorrow. Chapter 8, Play Until the Whistle. After the intense strain that Goggins had to put on his body through the Moab 240 and across Florida 200, he decides to get what should have been a simple procedure done on his knee to help ease the pain his body was feeling and get him into better condition for future competition. After this procedure, however, Goggins knew that something was seriously wrong with his knee, and he started to wonder if he would ever race again. His knees were messed up to the point where he could barely do 22 minutes on the exercise bike before the pain became too excruciating for him to handle. Just 1 month back, Goggins was running 240 miles across Utah and 200 miles across Florida, not to mention finishing in second and first place respectively. He expressed his concerns post-surgery with his surgeon, who explained that his knees, because of his training, were more tough and harder than what is normal because of the amount of strain that he had put on them. This leads to the surgeon's instruments not working as intended on Goggins' knees during the surgery, so the surgeon ended up having to drill holes into Goggins' left femur, but did not mention this until Goggins asked for details almost a month after the surgery had taken place. He then decided to do his own research and came up with the conclusion that he had received some sort of microfracture surgery that he was not aware of before the surgery took place. He pressed the surgeon for answers, and to his surprise, he got some. The surgeon said microfracture surgery requires a minimum of 5 holes, and he said the 2 holes he drilled should be filled in by this point, and he should be back to running in no time. Goggins had a hunch that the doctor was full of shit, and he said that particular response confirmed it. Despite his pain, Goggins begins rehabbing over the next month and decides to enter in a different type of race in 2021, the Natchez Trace 444, which runs from Nashville, Tennessee to Natchez, Mississippi. During the 444, cyclists will encounter no stop signs, no traffic lights, great pavement, armadillos, wild turkeys, deer, and beautiful scenery. Goggins believes since he'll be biking instead of running, the strain on his knees will not be as bad, and he'll be able to compete at a high level despite still being on crutches and limping on race day. Goggins enters the race and ends up finishing in second place, finishing 3 hours after the first place winner, who had been training an entire year leading up to the event. Meanwhile, Goggins had just got out of knee surgery 13 weeks prior to the 444. With this race behind him, Goggins immediately sets his mind on new goals that do not involve putting his body to the test, but instead his strength in the class classroom. He begins studying for an advanced EMT course, which he not only passes, but is the valedictorian of his class, and then studies for and passes the national exam to get certified. Finally, Goggins finishes up this chapter by encouraging people to run the 4x4x48, where people run and exercise over a weekend to raise money for charity, and then he goes back to work at a local hospital where he's helping out patients and cleaning up blood and messes. While David Goggins is known for his superhero-like endurance challenges that he does, I find it admirable that he also challenges himself by hitting the books and still managing to help out at a local hospital and do a charity event. This makes me wonder, if he manages to do all of this, what else can we accomplish when we apply ourselves at 100%? Chapter 9, Wringing Out the Soul. In this chapter, we learn that valiance of the effort is more important than the outcome. Goggins sets on a journey to become a smoke jumper, which are specially trained wildland firefighters who provide an initial attack response on remote wildland fires, and they get on the side of the fire by parachute. What's more is that Goggins revealed in a podcast in January 2023 that he only gets paid about $15 an hour to do smoke jumping, when he could easily be making hundreds of thousands of dollars through his business ventures, but he believes there's more growth and self-learning in a noble job like smoke jumping as opposed to speaking to companies about his book. As you can see, Goggins lives what he preaches. We learned that last chapter that Goggins had gotten injured on the first day of firefighting training, but this time the risk is much higher, as Goggins is told that if he were to descend by parachute, there's about a 50% chance that his leg would break on impact because of his messed up knees. Regardless, Goggins decides to go all in on training between motivating and helping his teammates with their fears, as well as facing his own demons. There's lots of training they go through before they even get to jump out of the plane, but Goggins and his squad make it through all this training leading up to the big day. Today is the day that Goggins is going to jump out of a plane thousands of feet in the air and make his descent towards the drop zone. As he gets closer to the ground, he pulls for his parachute and it deploys. Even with the air resistance provided by his parachute, smoke jumpers must land in a certain way to avoid injury because they're still going downwards at a decent rate. Goggins sees the ground getting so close, and time starts to slow down, and as he's about to hit the ground, he makes it, with no leg breaking, and successfully completes his first landing. He notices his form needs a lot of improving, so he then goes and does it again, and again, and again, until he's sure that his legs will be fine from jumping out from the plane and into a real wildfire. Goggins teaches us through his many attempts that his mentality when attacking challenges in life is that he wants to neutralize the thought of failure. He doesn't look at failures as failure, he just looks at it like a new attempt. Goggins overcomes his obstacles, professional medical opinion, and becomes a smoke jumper against all odds. Evolving into the best version of ourselves is a lifelong process that involves continually seeking greatness, and the only thing stopping you from becoming the greatest version of yourself is you. Key takeaways. Goggins shows us discipline, how to hustle, and how to be the best version of ourselves through leading by example and going through daunting journeys and completing obstacles that inspire us to push ourselves to be better. Never finished with all of his life lessons, hardships, and mind-numbingly incredible challenges really blew my mind, and I plan to take what I've learned from this book and apply it to my life, and my plan is to run my first ever race this year and post an update on the community tab so you guys can see that I actually take action after reading something like this and not just make a video about it and forget it. Hopefully, I can inspire you all through my videos and my actions to be the best version of yourself that you can be. Thank you guys so much for watching Visual Vitamin, and if you guys appreciated the level of detail and work that went into making a video like this, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like so we know to do more book reviews and videos like this one in the future. Stay hard.